Welcome to Plant More, Worry Less, a podcast by the Huachuma Foundation. We are grateful for the supporters who make this show possible. To learn more about our work or support our mission, please visit huachumafoundation.org. Also note, in this podcast we discuss sacred plant medicines for educational purposes only. Nothing herein should be considered medical or legal advice, and we do not encourage using any substances in places where they are illegal. We hope you enjoy this very special episode.
Hi, what's up, everybody? Thank you so much for joining us for another episode of Plant More, Worry Less. It's me, Dani, and I have Hamid with me today, and we're going to be talking about Huachuma frequently asked questions. And we were talking, and we thought this would be a great podcast and conversation to have because of the retreats we do and all of the talk around Huachuma. And I think a lot of people have questions about what is it, where does it come from, what to look for in a facilitator, where to partake in Huachuma if you feel so called, and lots of other frequently asked questions that we're going to cover today. So thanks for joining. Hamid, hello.
Hey, Dani. Yeah. So hopefully we can get through some of these questions. I have a feeling that people might have more. And again, people, you can always reach out to us if you have questions you want us to talk about on the show or topics. Just email us and we'd be happy to do so.
Okay, thank you for that. And I guess the first thing to start off with today is Huachuma. What is it? Just in general, I guess.
I feel like we asked and answered this question maybe in another episode because it was like, what is Huachuma? And we asked Ross. I know we asked some other guests. I asked you.
You trick questioned me.
I should question you because it's a complex question. I think that what I would like to say about this, and you can offer your own, is that I'd like to dispel at least one myth about what Huachuma is. And that myth is pervasive, I think, in conversations I have with people, especially here in Arizona, because a lot of people plant cactus and they'll say, I planted a Huachuma or I have a Huachuma. And it's a true statement. But when you start to look at what they've actually planted, a lot of people have planted a specific species of cactus, a specific variety or subvariety. And one of the things that I think is very important for people to understand is that when we use the term Huachuma, we're using more of a traditional term. And Huachuma has many terms, right? We talked about that in our last episode with Daya. He mentioned the term San Pedro. San Pedro is much more of a common term that people use for these cacti. But the myth is that there is one cactus called Huachuma. That is the pervasive myth. You will hear people say Huachuma is, and then they'll say it is a species of cactus called Trichoceros pachanoi or Echinopsis pachanoi. And while that is a type of Huachuma, that is one of the Huachuma cacti, it isn't the only one. There are other species and then other subvarieties or phenotypes. Again, if you're a botanist and I'm using phenotype and variety incorrectly, I apologize. I am not a botanist. I know that there are different types of these cacti, so please correct me. But these kinds of cacti fall into a broad category that's often called Trichoceros. Trichoceros has subparts, like there's a Trichoceros pachanoi, which is what most people think of when they think of Huachuma, but it isn't the only cactus that is considered a Huachuma. There's Trichoceros peruvianus, which tends to grow perhaps maybe higher elevations. It has more spines. It has a very distinct look. There's a cactus called Bridgesii, Trichoceros bridgesii, which is also known as the Bolivian torch cactus. That's sometimes referred to as Huachuma. And there's even more. There's another one called Trichoceros scapulicolis, which is sometimes referred to as Huachuma. And then within these big species, there's probably hundreds. We don't even know how many different variations, because all of these species, the Trichoceros, can interbreed with each other, and they can be pollinated out in the wild by, let's say, a Pachinoi might be next to or near a Peruvianus, that they can naturally cross-pollinate and create something else, like a mix, like a hybrid. And then what do we call that? We don't know. Like, there's just too many different variations. But if you open up most books about San Pedro, they're going to say San Pedro cactus is Echinopsis pachinoi. And I just think that's a little bit narrow of a viewpoint, because these are, many different types, and each type has its own uses, traditional uses, and also different qualities to it. So when we talk about Huachuma on this podcast, we're talking about all of them, all of the different types of Huachuma that are out there, all of the different types of San Pedro cactus that are out there. And sometimes we get specific. We might say pachinoi. Then we're talking about, a very specific type, right? Does that resonate for you, Dani?
Yeah, of course. It really opens up a whole new world of cactus for me, because when you say Huachuma, I just have this specific sort of version in my head. But then after going through some of the stuff with you about looking at how the spines grow and how many of them and where, and it just goes to show how many different kinds of cactus there are out there. And it also makes me want to ask about the alkaloids too, and how they respond differently in our bodies. And yeah.
Yeah. Well, let's go back to one other thing I mentioned, which is that here in Arizona, also California, and the West Coast of the United States, there is a species of cactus that is sold. You could go to Home Depot or your local garden center, and often they will sell you something labeled San Pedro cactus. This particular species is something that when you start to get into this world, it tends to have another name. The other name is PC, just the letters PC, which stands for predominant cultivar. It means this is the most predominant type of San Pedro that we have. And it is a very specific type that looks very unique. In fact, you don't really see that type in South America. At least I haven't seen it. So it's possible that it existed at one time there, but it was brought to the United States. Maybe it was hybridized. Maybe it's a mix. There's a beautiful exploration of this on troutsnotes.com. Trout's Notes, anybody who doesn't know who Keeper Trout is a botanist who has done the most amazing exploration of these cacti. He has free books that you can look at, and he'll go through each type, and you can start to see the differences. Anybody that's trying to learn about these cacti, I always send them to Trout's Notes and just spend, 5 years of your life trying to go through there and understand what he's saying. But he has a very funny, comical thing on there called Pachinoi or Pachinat, which is fun because what he's doing is trying to show you which ones are these quote unquote PC or Pachinat, which he says these are not actually Pachinoi. But like, for instance, I have friends here in Arizona that are always sending me pictures of their cactus or their cactus gardens, and they're filled with Pachinat. They're filled with this PC variety, right? And there's nothing wrong with calling that a Huachuma or a San Pedro, but to think that that is really the San Pedro, the Huachuma, is a little bit off. This is just one type in that way. And I want to go to the name Pachinoi, for instance, because some people pronounce it Pakanoi. I've heard people say Pakanoi, which in Latin names, like there's cactus called Pachyceres that are spelled the same way. It is traditional to say the Latin CH like a K, like Pachanoi. But in this case, because Pachanoi is actually named after a person, I think his name was Alberto Pachano, something like that. Alberto Pachano, who was a botanist. I'm just throwing this out there because I haven't looked at it in a long time, but maybe he was a botanist around the turn of the century, 1900s, who first wrote descriptions of this particular cactus. Later, when the cactus was named, that particular species was named after Alberto Pachano. So I hear people say Pachanoi, and I said, that's right, if it were Latin, but I think actually we should probably respect the guy that it's named after and pronounce it more like his name. So I do say it Pachanoi, which some people say it differently. That one, the Pachanoi, is the one that is most traditionally thought of as Huachuma and San Pedro. And it is the one that is got the tiniest areolas. So the tiny little parts where the spines come out, the little circles. The Pachanois, you can usually see them. They're very smooth. They've got tiny little areolas and they got very small spines most of the time. They can have longer spines, but they're the really beautiful, loving kind of cactus look. They kind of embody that element of having shed their protection, right? Like they don't need the spines anymore. They're open their hearts. They've taken off their armor and they're just there. And they got these tiny little spines. I mean, the spine doesn't offer any protection for it. It's possible that the spines serve another purpose, which is to gather the dew, the morning dew, so that they can kind of drink, water when there's no rain, but there's a morning dew. So it might serve another purpose other than protection, which is just to connect with their source of water. Those Pachanois, like with the tiny spines, they're very different in character when you see them versus something like a Peruvianus, right? The Peruvianus ones tend to be notchy. They're not as smooth. The places where the spines come out, the areolas, tend to be bigger, like just rounder, larger. And they can have all kinds of lengths of spines and different numbers of spines. So those are the ones that look kind of aggressive sometimes, the Peruvianus. And I think in another podcast, maybe we talked about it, but there's this concept in working with plants called the doctrine of signatures. And doctrine of signatures really talks about how the plants, they're really showing us their qualities. So if you're attuned to how they look, the way that they kind of manifest their form, that tells you something about their personality and something about the medicine that they offer, right? So like the Pachanoi, which is, mostly spineless usually and very smooth and very open, it kind of embodies that open-hearted feeling and not as aggressive, not as sharp, not as prickly, perhaps. The experience, let's say, of working with Pachanoi as a medicine tends to be more like that in my personal experience. Whereas something like the Peruvianus, the big notchy ones with all the spines, and they're really prickly and large too, kind of aggressive. When you take those, you do feel a little bit like spines are growing out of your body. It has this kind of sharpness to it. I don't know if you've experienced that, where you feel like maybe you understand its personality, like why it does that spine thing, because you feel that way. And there's that element to it too. We can talk about the alkaloids. That's where I'm getting, because I think the alkaloids play into this, like the different mix of alkaloids that are within them might be why it's like that. But I think the alkaloids can sometimes also be a distraction. So I do want to talk about that as well. But yeah, let me just stop there for a second and see what you have to say.
Well, just thank you for taking us all through that. It's been one of my favorite things is to learn about identifying cactus. Because then when we're like walking in Peru, I'm like, oh, what is that? What is that? And even in the stores now I'm like, oh, that's a Peruvian apple. Because one of the posts that I made for the Huachuma Foundation Instagram, I was like looking at different cactus, and it really opens up a whole new world other than just the medicine world. But you get to know the cactus on a different level, which I think is really special. And even as we're talking now, it makes me think about how Huachuma is a general term for all the cactus, but it speaks more to the spirit of it or the consciousness of it, and how then you can like come down and organize them in their own little species and sort of boxes. So yeah, it's just giving me context and perspective and getting me a little closer to the cactus, which I love.
Yeah. They're all really beautiful. I have so many different types here too that I've planted, and they're all got their own personalities. There's something that's happened in the United States, which is that in the circles of people growing these cacti, there's like a huge community around it that they've started to name them, which I know you like, but like they'll name a particular one, let's say like they call it lumberjack, or there's one called psychonaut, right? Or sharks. And they have all these cutesy names. Then there's other names that are more botanical. Like you'll see names that are numbers sometimes for people that are trying to purchase these cacti to plant. You'll see names like KK139, KK, something like that. This is referring to Carl Kneis, who was a botanist who brought back various species, and he categorized them by numbers. So a lot of them, like the KKs, that just indicates this was one that he found, right? Like in his garden that he planted, and then people trade in them that way. So it's really funny because some of the names are just cutesy, like, and some of the names refer to the person who found it, like in the United States. So maybe like someone was walking in San Diego and saw it in someone's yard and got a piece of it, and then they'll name it after that guy. So it might be like Dave's San Diego or something. Like it has these weird names like that. And I think it's kind of funny. It does kind of mimic, like what happened in, I'm not really into the mushroom world, but I know that like mushrooms have names like that where they give them funny names. So that's happening in the United States. Like when we go down to Peru, there's none of that. They're not like, this is KK139 or whatever. They're like, this is Huachuma. This is San Pedro. And it's a different type, but they don't necessarily have all of these same types of names for them. As far as I know, maybe there are names like within certain communities for certain ones, but overall it seems to be kind of a disconnect between the ones that came here to the United States from South America. I will say, like, when we were starting all of this, and you mentioned like making a post for the Huachuma Foundation. Like sometimes I see posts for people, they'll post something about Huachuma. And today, because AI art is like all of the rage, they'll just type into their AI art generator, like, make me a picture of Huachuma or San Pedro. None of them are Huachuma or San Pedro. Whatever it generates is usually some kind of saguaro or just some made up thing. I have yet to see the AI be able to do this. So if anybody's relying on AI for their information on this, you are being misled. I will say that this is one of those areas where if you want to learn to identify them, you really do need to go to an authority like Trout's Notes. You need to spend time looking at them. And the more time you spend with them, the easier it becomes to identify it. Like now, I don't think about it. I can just say, okay, that's Peruvianus. That's some type of Pachanoi. Or sometimes you get weird ones where you don't know, and there's some communities on Facebook, some groups where you can post pictures and people will offer their opinions, but you'll see the opinions are all over the place. And I think one of the things that Keeper Trout has noted is that the categorization of these cacti has been hopelessly muddled just from the beginning. So a lot of times what you think is Pachinoi may not be Pachinoi, maybe Puvianus, and maybe we're just drawing lines where there don't need to be lines drawn. It's kind of like me, like I'm half Iranian, half Hungarian, like to try to put me as one or the other doesn't make sense, right? So like some of these cacti, they're just so hybridized that we don't know what they are. And maybe it doesn't matter because they're their own thing. But you did mention the alkaloids. I don't know if you want me to start going into alkaloids.
Yeah, definitely.
So alkaloids, for those that don't know, these are plant compounds. Obviously, they're of an alkaline nature, which is why they're called alkaloids. They tend to be the medicinal parts of plants. So there's all kinds of alkaloids in the plant world. And again, Keeper Trout has a book on cactus alkaloids, and it is extensive. And these are just the alkaloids that we know. Our means of analyzing these things are pretty limited. So it's also important to understand that if somebody says, like Keeper Trout says, like Peruvianus has these 5 alkaloids, what he means is these are the 5 that we were able to identify. Because it could have hundreds of alkaloids. It could have thousands. We don't know. We don't really have the technology to do that. Obviously, the primary alkaloid that most people think of when they think of these cacti is mescaline. And mescaline is often talked about as the active component of these cacti, so to speak, the psychoactive component. And I think that's because mescaline became a very big part of the early psychedelic movement on its own. There was a lot of efforts to isolate it, to work with it. In fact, mescaline is probably the first psychedelic, as we use the term psychedelic in Western speech, because it was found in peyote and found in these trichoceres cacti, and it was fairly easy to pull out chemically. Now, when people refer to just mescaline, I think they're missing a lot, because we know, and this comes from Trout, so I'm going to give him credit for this, because this, I think, comes from his book. I made notes a while back that I pulled up. Let's say like you take a trichoceres peruvianus. Obviously, there's mescaline there. In fact, Peruvianus tends to have a high amount of mescaline, just comparatively speaking, to other varieties. But then there's tyramines, different types of tyramines. There's things like, I'm just going to read 3-methoxytryptamine, whatever that is. Obviously, it's a tryptamine, and tryptamines are psychoactive in their own way, that we may not think about that as a psychoactive component, but it's in there. There's things like 3,4-dimethoxyphenolthylamine, whatever that is. Another potentially psychoactive part of Peruvianus. There's 4-hydroxy 3.5-dimethoxyphenolthylamine, and other things in there. There's fats, obviously, like when you get down to what the cacti is composed of. There's fats, there's sugars, there's minerals, there's like all kinds of things in there. So it's not just mescaline. I think it's important to stop there, because when people think of these cacti as a psychoactive cacti, often they're thinking mescaline, especially in the United States. The way that the cacti are treated in the United States, it seems, is that they're kind of prized based on how much mescaline they have. Like when I mentioned some names earlier, like sharks or psychonaut. These are, names given to specific ones that people found had lots of mescaline. And although I'm not part of that world that deals in, extracting mescaline, by the way, that's not legal in the United States anyway, that seems to be why those cacti are prized is because some psychonauts decided that it had a high amount of mescaline. But my question, and I don't think that this is unique to me, I don't really think mescaline is all that these cacti have to offer. I think there's a deeper aspect to them, perhaps showing through their vibration and just connecting with them as plants. Like, for instance, some people have said like scopulocolis, Trichoceres scopulocolis, is not very active, like doesn't have a lot of mescaline, right? But actually it has a lot of other things maybe, and it's quite beautiful to work with. I have worked with it as a medicine. Pachinoi tends to have less mescaline than Peruvianus. But does that make it less medicinal? I don't know that that's the case. There's parts of Pachinoi that are very strong, even if it doesn't have the same mescaline content. And other people have observed this as well. People that have measured mescaline and found very little mescaline in these cacti, but then taken it, and it's very profound. So my question is, well, is it the mescaline that's doing the work here? Is it the mescaline that really provides all of the medicine? I don't think it's easy to answer that question. Like, here's from trout as well. So I listed some from the Peruvianus, but when he did analysis of the Pachinoi, he found even more alkaloids. So some of the ones he found in the Pachinoi were anhelonidine and hordenine. Again, I'm not a chemist. I don't pretend to be one on a podcast or TV. Some of these alkaloids tend to be stimulants, in a way, sort of give it an energetic quality. And I've heard people talk about that as kind of a differentiating factor between, the Huachuma cacti and, let's say, peyote. And that peyote has lots of alkaloids as well. It has mescaline, but it has a lot of sedating alkaloids that kind of sedate you and kind of put you in this feeling of not wanting to move. Whereas the Huachuma varieties tend to energize you and stimulate you so that you have energy and you do kind of want to move. So there's that aspect of complexity. There's, like, in the Bridgesii, Trichoceres Bridgesii, we're getting really complicated now. These are the Bolivian torch. He also found other alkaloids that were named Bridgesinine, like just after the cacti, just unique alkaloids. Camphorol, quercetin, so we don't really know what's doing it. I think that personally, I let go of the alkaloids as not a consideration for me at all. And to judge a particular cactus, like, because it doesn't have a lot of mescaline, that it's somehow of lesser value, is ridiculous to me. Some of the most profound medicinal cacti may not have a lot of mescaline, but they have other medicine to offer. So that's just my personal feeling, and I can go into other examples of why I think it's the case, but we'll see what you have to say.
Well, I'm happy that you added that last part too, because I think sometimes, even with the cannabis industry, people tend to commercialize like THC or commercialize mescaline, and they think that stronger is better. And I just don't think that's the case. That's just looking at the cactus from one perspective, but it's actually, there's so much more going on than just the different alkaloids that are there. So I'm happy that you spoke to that, and also talked a little bit about peyote as well, because I think that's a big question that I hear most often is people want to know how it compares to the peyote cactus or even ayahuasca or mushrooms, or they're so curious about the different ways that it could make you feel. And I just appreciate that.
Yeah. So even if you don't know anything about the alkaloids, again, going to the doctrine of signatures, you can see the Huachuma are growing very tall. If left to their own devices, they form these huge columns that are reaching for the heavens, and the peyote, this tiny button, never really does that. It it hugs the earth. It just stays very low to the earth, and it's very kind of round and wants to touch the earth, just doesn't want to move from the earth. And if you knew nothing about alkaloids, but you knew something about how plants communicate or show us their use, you would be able to see that the experience of working with peyote would be very much like the peyote cactus. You would become like the peyote cactus. You would be very low to the earth. You would want to be hugging the earth, grounded. And, with the Huachuma, it can be much different. You might be wanting to walk, wanting to move. There might be an urge to stand up and kind of just express, like reach for the sun, reach for the wind. And, as far as the experiences go, I think a lot of it has to do with how the space is held and the ceremonies, honestly. But there's definitely a personality to them. And they're very different. There are people that I know who only work with peyote, and they've tried Huachuma, different types of Huachuma, and they do not like it. They do not resonate with that as a medicine. And then there are people that work with Huachuma that don't like working with the peyote. I personally love both of them. I feel like they're both beautiful, and they have their own medicine to offer us. I also want to step back because I mentioned that in the United States, a lot of the judgment about certain cacti had been based on the mescaline content, and even because people were extracting mescaline, doing mescaline extractions. But even the term extraction is really problematic because it, again, puts us in this place of valuing something based on what we can extract from it, what we can get from it, instead of just valuing and appreciating the cactus for what it is offering to us in terms of teaching, and not really trying to get something out of it, So I feel like the more you work with these cactus, you start to appreciate that quality to them, that they are beings. They are living beings. They have a consciousness. We don't really fully understand them, because in some ways they're smarter than us. Really. They've figured out how to live in such a beautiful way without all of the neuroses that comes with being a human. And they've picked a beautiful part of the world to live in. And they certainly have things to teach us that we can learn from. But I think we need to treat them like that, like teachers, not like something that we extract medicine out of, if that makes sense.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah. Curious about the heart-opening properties of Huachuma. Do you think that's a spirit, a vibration, something chemical that's in there, or what do you think the heart opening? Because I think people have classified Huachuma as a, quote, gentle heart opener, but after you've worked with it, you realize it's not so gentle. But that definitely is a thing that I think comes with Huachuma, is this feeling. At least that's how I describe it to people. It's like super heart medicine. And I just want to talk a little bit about that, because I think peyote still has this beauty to it, but it doesn't feel so like light, bright heart energy.
Yeah, I've heard that a lot, and I can understand it. There's definitely a property of working with these cactus that take us out of our head. They're much more interested in us feeling, I think, and perceiving in ways other than through thinking. Thinking is like our default setting. We like to think about everything and analyze it. And some aspect to working with these cactus is to say to us, to show us, make us experience what it's like not to be stuck in the head, but to just come into the body. And there's certainly a disarming quality to the Huachuma that will open us. We basically, with Huachuma, take off our armor. Like I mentioned, the spines, like they're kind of an example. It's like, I don't need the spines to protect anymore, right? I'm open, I'm vulnerable. And in that vulnerability, we can feel a lot more. Of course, we can feel more pain, but we can also feel more joy and more pleasure. So it's like a lesson when you work with the cacti, because they take off the armor for us in a way. They help us to take it off. And then what do we feel is ourselves. Don't think that, I mean, my experience is that what we're revealing is us. What the cactus is revealing in us is our nature. So when people say it's a gentle heart opener, in a way, it's kind of implying that there's something wrong with us. Like we need to open our hearts. I don't know. But I think what really people are experiencing there is that when they work with the cactus, they take off their armor and they feel more. And guess what? When we're feeling more, we're going to feel more of the good. We're going to feel our true nature, which is to be loving and compassionate and open. And, you know, that, I don't know if you want to look at it like an alkaloid does that. See, to me, I'm sure there will be people who listen, and there are people that know more about chemistry that are going to say, oh, it's this particular alkaloid that is the heart opening. And it's very similar to MDMA. I've heard that. It's very much like MDMA. It's like that. And that's why you have the heart opening. Well, maybe. I mean, I don't know the answer to that. I've certainly been in enough ceremonies with people who didn't have the heart opening, who were stuck in a place of fear, were stuck in a place of pain, because that's what was revealed and it was just below the surface. And that's what they ended up experiencing. And so I also think it puts an unfair expectation on people, like that if they're not feeling that they did something wrong. But I don't think that's true. I think the cactus is just going to reveal the parts of ourselves that are ready to be felt, ready to be expressed. And maybe we're not ready for the full heart opening part. Maybe we have to work through other layers first, like the fear part, the shame, the judgment. And maybe after we work through all of that, then it starts to open. Then we start to feel and touch like that piece that people are always talking about. So, you know, I've heard other people tell me, Huachuma is what MDMA would like to be. And I kind of like, I don't know, because now you're giving a consciousness to a laboratory made chemical, like it would like to be that. And I don't know. But I will say that we have learned how to make MDMA and all of these phenylethylamines, like Sasha Shulgin, Alexander Shulgin wrote a book called PICAL, Phenylethylamines I Have Known and Loved. And he was synthesizing all of these class of alkaloids, but he was inspired by his work with mescaline, which is a cactus alkaloid. And I think in a way, then we can attribute, MDMA and these other ones that were invented or discovered by humans, we can still attribute it to the cactus because the cactus inspired the chemists to go try to find these and try to synthesize them. So maybe MDMA is just a baby of the cactus. Maybe the cactus gave us MDMA, and that would be a better way to look at it, as an alternative way of entering that heart space. I certainly don't. I've worked with MDMA, but it was like I was 19 and working at a club by dancing. Certainly worked with MDMA by dancing all night. It has a very different effect, honestly. To me, if you compare Huachuma to MDMA, you're kind of missing something, because MDMA like blows you way beyond your boundaries, I think, to the point where there's a consequence after. It's almost like you've done something wrong the next day and you went way, way too far. And And Huachuma and the alkaloids in these cacti, they take us to a place where there's not this judgment, and I think they teach us about that. Like they teach us it's okay to feel loving and good and enjoy. And we don't, the next day you're not like, depressed or, craving something. So it's a different experience. So I really don't like to compare, MDMA to these cacti. You mentioned about like what Chuma is talked about as the gentle heart opener. I have a theory about that. Maybe I'll give you my theory and then you give me yours. But
Okay.
my theory is that in the United States and maybe in some parts of South America where they're offering the ceremonies, the preparations that are made of the cactus are fairly weak. And maybe it's because in the United States, they're working with the one that I mentioned, the pachanat, which really is not a very strong cactus in its activity as far as alkaloids and medicine, that it is very gentle. Like the experience can be very gentle, like subtle even. And I've had many people tell me that, oh, they've had Huachuma and they don't really feel much, which to me tells me that they drank something very weak. It wasn't prepared properly, for one. I mean, you now know, it's very challenging and time consuming to prepare this cactus into a medicine. It isn't something you can just chop up and throw in a pot. I mean, it requires a lot of care and prayers. And I think the more that we put into it, the stronger the result is. So if people, for instance, came to Peru with us and came on one of the ceremonies that we do, and we've had people who have had Huachuma do that, and they're like, "Holy smokes, what is this?" It's like a different medicine, right? Because at that point, it's really not a gentle heart opener. You've got a very powerful medicine. For some people, it can be overwhelming, actually, how powerful it is. And it's not to say that you can't do that, outside of Peru, but the people that are mostly facilitating outside of Peru often don't know. I don't think they know how to potentiate the cactus by making it properly, maybe. So there's that aspect. Or people are taking the cactus in very weird ways, like chopping it and eating it. Very strange way to take the cactus, and probably not going to be super strong, but you probably feel the vibration for sure. Or, taking dried powder. Very hard to take enough dried powder to have a full experience. It's not that you won't feel something, but it's just a lot of fiber for the body to process. And most likely what will happen is by the time people take enough, they're going to purge it. So they don't really get the full effects. So these are just my theories on the gentle heart opener. I don't know what your theories are.
My theory has to do with the person consuming the medicine and the person making it too. So like we always talk about, oh, it's the prayers. That's how it's made, is like putting in the prayers. So I think part of it is the person making it, like where they're making it from and what they're sending into it. And also the strength of it and making sure it's a pachanoi and not a pachanat. And also the sincerity of the person consuming it. I think that some people come into ceremonies not realizing the gravity of the ceremonies and the prayers and the seeds we plant and all these different things. I think maybe they're just coming to try the cactus and go for a hike, and maybe it's sort of surface level intentions. But I think when you enter into a ceremony with a lot of sincerity and commitment and your own prayers and your own like devotion, even if you take weak sort of medicine, I think that it'll still come into your life in a really strong way. And I think also sometimes people just judge the experience based on the ceremony in real time. And what I've learned with Huachuma and maybe all the other medicines, but I think Huachuma more than anything else, is that sometimes it takes months or even years for that one ceremony to like really calibrate into your life and to work its magic and heart-centered vibration. And now I really, after a couple of years of working with this, I can understand the putting quotes around gentle heart opener, because the more devoted I get to this medicine, the stronger the heart opening gets. And also that comes with like pain. Like the balance of that is like so much love and clarity and authenticity and like really feeling my true nature, but then coming into life and where I'm not living in alignment with that and the pain that comes with that. And so yeah, it's I think it's like the practitioner and the consumer, and the medicine does what the medicine does. It feels like secondary to me. And I'm just saying that because of my own prayers. As I have done many ceremonies, if I go in and I'm really like sincere in my intentions, then usually what I get out is like very powerful. But if I'm coming in a little surface, then it seems to just kind of hang there.
Yeah, that's a good point that I often forget, because I only work with, excuse me, I only work with this medicine in the context of like sincere ceremony. And I do agree with you that if people approach it with kind of a casual nature, they're going to have a casual encounter. This is like one of the, I would say, masculine aspects of the medicine in a way, which is that you have to embody something. You have to bring something to the table. You know, whether it's your prayer and your attention and your sincerity and your willingness, then the cactus will meet you there and help you. But if you just bring like, I'm going to drink this and hang out with my friends, or just spend the whole day talking and, you know, like distracted, the cactus is going to meet you there. Then that's going to be your experience. So yeah, I forget, you know, because I don't spend a lot of time with some of the ceremonies that I hear about where they just, it's a very casual type experience. Then I do see that kind of plays into it. And the way that we work with it, with our teacher, with Miguel, and the way that he's taught us, it's very intentional. And it's hard to imagine having a ceremony like that is kind of like a bust. Like it always just takes you way in. And, you know, almost the amount of the medicine doesn't really matter, because once you get in the vibration of it and you start to work with the prayers and the intentions, it just opens. The whole thing opens. And you don't really need the medicine to open you then. You're just kind of opening yourself. Yeah, I would agree with that. And, you know, no judgment to like the ways that people work with it either. I don't see a problem with, you know, some of the ceremonies where it's casual, because maybe that's just all they're ready for, honestly. And that's all that they need that day. You know, I think you and I tend to be the types that want to go deep. Like when we do the ceremonies, we want to go.
Yeah, definitely. And I think when people come to Peru, they've already invested time, money, energy, you know, courage to get all the way to a foreign country to work with the medicine there. So I feel like there's already a certain amount of reverence and commitment. But I've even seen people come out of those ceremonies and feel like they wanted more or didn't go as deep. And I think they're learning how to direct their prayers too, and learning. And maybe it's good to sort of start surface and have the courage to go deeper and to open wider. And I think maybe that's why it's a good thing to keep building a relationship with this medicine, because sometimes at first it's really just a meeting and meeting a new acquaintance, and then trusting it and trusting where it takes you and trusting that you can really let down your walls. Yeah, it's one of my favorite things to talk about, because I've had such a journey with learning how to open myself and learning how to surrender and like really direct my prayers and be really intentional. So that's one of the things I've learned from working with this medicine.
Mm-hmm. Sometimes also, just to add to that, the armor that we have, it will not come off in the context of one ceremony. It will not come off in the context of two ceremonies because we've built it throughout our entire life. It is a way of being. It is a way of kind of guarding and honestly protecting ourselves that has served us well. And I also work with minerals, as you know, so there is a physiological thing that happens when we're very guarded and when we're very shielded. And we tend to build up certain minerals as a defense. And you can see that when we do the hair tests. I do hair tests, for people before we go to Peru. And usually I can see in there whether they're going to feel the medicine strongly or not. And it has to, I'm not going to give away the secret sauce, but it has to do with calcium mostly, where after a time of trauma, we end up building up a defense mechanism against feeling certain emotions. And that is reflected in the calcium on a hair test. And one of the interesting things that I discovered, and this is out there in the literature, is that mescaline itself activates the release of calcium. So on a physiological level, some people will build up this calcium layer within their cells that acts as a numbing device, so they don't really feel things deeply. And mescaline, probably some of these other alkaloids, help to eliminate that calcium. You basically pee it out during the ceremony. And that opens a physiological feeling for people. They feel their body in a different way because they were numb until that point. And then that provides the opportunity to feel the emotions. But like I said, there's people that have built up so much of that one Huachuma ceremony, two, isn't going to chip away at the calcium enough to actually get to that heart opening or to that deeper layer. And so everybody also enters the ceremony space with their entire life history and probably their ancestral history, and will have a different experience of it. I think you experienced a little bit of that, if I recall.
Yeah, I was going to say that when we first did the hair tissue test for me, the first time we went, you were like, okay, you're going to need a lot of medicine because I had some calcium built up and some things. And I didn't. I remember you looking at me during ceremony when we were in Peru and you're like, yeah, you need more medicine. So you got Miguel and had me some more. But now, sometimes we're not even out of the first altar. And I open up my eyes after singing or something and I'm like, okay, everything's already already here. And I don't know if that's, I don't know if it can actually work that fast or if I'm just slipping into the vibration more easily or what that's about. Because I know mescaline takes a little bit of time to actually come to full effect. So there's definitely been a big change, but it's taken me, 25 ceremonies, 4 trips to Peru to really start to I think maybe relax and surrender in. So I don't need as much medicine, although I do still like a lot of medicine, but I don't know if I need it as much anymore. But I started off needing quite a bit.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't know if it's the mescaline per se, because like you've said, sometimes you drink the Huachuma and you feel it strongly right away. There's actually no time for it to have gone through your small intestine to be absorbed. And this is one of the reasons I believe that it's much more than just this alkaloid. That what we are doing is we're getting into the vibration of a particular plant. So in a way, we have our own vibration that's going, how we vibrate, and then we drink the medicine and the medicine's vibrating like this and we're going like this. And so they're trying to the medicine's trying to get us to sync up. And once we sync up, it's beautiful, right? Then we're in it. And the more our vibration is not in line with the vibration of the plant, the harder it is to sync up. And I think that aspect leads to people having, they just keep wanting to have more. Whereas once you really tune yourself and you've started to connect with these cactus, you can drink a little bit sometimes and you're already there. You're already with the medicine. And that's why, to me, the alkaloids are not that relevant because it can't really explain, that phenomenon. I'll give you another example. There are people that will drink this medicine, not just this medicine, let's say ayahuasca too, which has a very strong vibration. They'll drink it and instantly, almost instantaneously purge it all so that none of the medicine made it through their system and got absorbed, but they will have profound experience. And that to me is sort of, it's a little bit like the concept of homeopathy in a way, like there's a vibratory quality and then we get the vibratory quality. So, I've had that myself. There was a time where I was working very deeply with ayahuasca and I was doing a lot of ceremonies. And I got to the point where I would drink it. And one time I drank it, I instantly threw it up right away. But I had the deepest experience. Still to this day, it's like on my calendar. It's like the night I met God, right? And it was just, there was no physical medicine in my system, but it just took me, right? So I think that, like, for me, it really is like a vibration. And the vibration of these cactus are very strong. And when people don't experience it, like at the beginning, a lot of it is just that, like, we're just not used to getting in sync with that. And so they need more medicine to kind of feel it a little.
And also, a lot of people ask about purging. Is there purging with Huachuma? And I think that sometimes maybe this is part of that is getting into the vibration of the medicine. I mean, I'm sure there's more mental and emotional things that we're purging too, but I find that sometimes day one can be really difficult for people, the very first ceremony, maybe of their whole life. But then the second one seems to be a little bit smoother of a ride on the belly. And can you say anything about that?
I think purging is a very complicated thing that brings up a lot for people because, at least in our culture, the way that I was raised, purging, throwing up was not seen as something good. And so we probably had our mother, when we were young, or other caretaker trying to stop it. And we internalized that to the point where we feel like there's something wrong if we're nauseous and we need to suppress it. So it does bring up a lot, and I understand that. What I've come to, and again, I'm just sharing my own experience here, is that there are two types of vomitous purges. Let's just use that term. There's two types with this medicine and with ayahuasca, with these kinds of very powerful plants. The first is the energetic purge. The energetic purge really doesn't have anything to do with you not being able to digest the medicine on a physical level. It is a release of energy. And if you want to get technical, it might have something to do with the activation of the vagus nerve. That is our fight or flight nerve. And of course, the vagus nerve comes into the cranial nerves up here in the face, but also wanders down to the gut. It's what it controls: the heart, the lungs, the gut. And when that nerve gets sensitized, it wants to release anything that's available to release. Let's call it an emotion, a stored energy. It could be trauma that got stored there as energy. And if we do not have another way of releasing it, because maybe we actually have suppressed the other ways, and that's why it got trapped. The other ways being feeling the emotion associated with that, just expressing the emotion. Or the other way could be, moving our body in a certain way. If there's no other way, then the energy gets so intense, You feel it building, and then there will be a spasm that occurs to release that energy. And it's a spasming of all of the gut and the muscles in the stomach, and out comes, of course, whatever's in the stomach, but also the energy itself, the emotion behind it. You can think of it as releasing some energetic, indigestible thing, something you couldn't stomach, maybe from 10 years ago, maybe from that moment, I don't know. So that's the first type of purge. That one tends to happen earlier in the ceremonies, I think, for a lot of people, like right when it's really intense and they're just not accustomed to that feeling. They don't know what to do with it. They don't know where to put that energy. But there's another type of purge that can happen, which is the detoxification purge. And this is different because what ends up happening, and it usually is later in a ceremony, so like way after people have already digested all of the medicine, people are not drinking like gallons of medicine. They drink it, and after 15, 30 minutes, it's absorbed, it's gone. So if 2 hours later, they end up purging and a lot of liquid comes out, a lot of liquid, that can actually be a detoxification response where the body has now pushed out toxins. Some of the ways that our body has to protect us from reabsorbing the toxins in the gut is by activating the purge reflex. Because if we didn't purge it, then it would go through the small intestine, large intestine, and a lot of these toxins would get reabsorbed. So I think that's like an innate thing that is good. Like either way, they're both good, right? I don't know, you can share your experience. I've never purged with Huachuma or peyote, and it doesn't matter how much I take, and you've seen me like barely able to identify that I'm on planet Earth. I do not have that. Part of it might just be, well, first, I'm very clean. I mean, I'm super obsessed with being free of chemicals and everything. So I don't have a lot of chemicals to detox. But the other aspect is that I'm very willing and used to feeling and expressing what is there. So it's not getting me in a situation where I don't know what to do with that energy, so to speak. And you can see people's faces, like it's pretty obvious when they're gonna purge, because if you look at them, like, I mean, you pay attention during our next ceremonies, but see people's faces, there's no emotion happening. They're really stuffing it in. I have not yet seen, and I'm sure it will exist at some point in time, I have not yet seen somebody crying and purging at the same time. I have seen people not crying and purging. Mm-hmm. But usually if somebody has that face and they start to release the emotion, all of that energy starts coming out through the release of the emotion, and they don't purge. I have seen like people cry after they purge, but not like crying and then purging. So, and I haven't seen every experience. I'm sure there will be those, but it is something to notice. And that's why I think that when people are purging in that way, it's that they're not expressing some feeling. They're not letting it out, and they don't know that they're not letting it out. It's just how we're wired. So yeah, I don't know what you think about all that.
Well, I can agree with you. Thinking back on the ceremonies, I don't think I've ever seen somebody crying and purging at the same time. That's interesting. My experience with purging is I rarely ever do. I don't even really get nauseous, but I humbly say that because maybe there will be a ceremony that I am purging a lot. I don't know. But I tend to drink it and I'm like, I'm home. I feel so good. I'm like on my energy centers, like, yay, thank you. Yeah, very rarely will I ever get nauseous or purge. So that's just kind of my own experience with it, though.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I will say people are afraid of it. People are afraid of the purging. especially we go to Peru and I tell, we're going to tell the group, hey, we're going to go up to 14,000 feet all day. If you need to use the bathroom, go here. And people are like, well, then they start to get scared. Like, oh no, I'm going to be out there and I'm going to have to poop or I'm going to have to purge. And it's like, it's a big fear that comes up for people. I will say this. I mean, I don't know if this is just going to gross everybody out, but I don't feel like Huachuma has as much a tendency to lead to a purge that requires going to the bathroom. It tends to be more, if there is a purge, to be the type that is a vomiting purge. Ayahuasca is more notorious for sending you to the bathroom. I'm not saying it doesn't happen with Huachuma, but it's much more rare. And I came from yoga. So when I first started to attune to this medicine, I realized like, if you pay attention, it starts to activate something that in yoga they call mula bandha, which you cannot even release it once the Huachuma is taken effect. You're laughing, but you know what I'm talking about.
I do.
It's this upward pulling energy sort of at the base of the spine or the perineum. And so I have seen people tell me like, I don't know if I have to throw up. I don't know if I have to poop, because they're not sure what they're feeling. But then they'll go try to poop and nothing happens. So again, like I want to gross everybody out, but it's just a very interesting quality of the cacti. And then like we joke and I'm like, oh, it's because cactus don't have butts. And you become a cactus.
Yeah, that's true. It's good. But a lot of people that I talk to about coming on hikes with us, they get nervous about, where am I going to throw up? Where am I going to go to the bathroom? Where is all this going to happen? Like that is probably the number one fear, if anything. People think that they're going to sort of lose control and lose their faculties and things like that. But for me, it doesn't seem to be that way. I rarely even have to pee when we're hiking. And sometimes until like long after I get home, I'm like, oh my gosh, I still haven't peed or anything. But that's just me. Sometimes people do, but the purging, it does. And it's not like sometimes with ayahuasca, it's like it can be excessive and there's like a ton of it. With Huachuma, it kind of feels really like focused and it just for like a second, and then you can kind of keep going. It doesn't seem like something you have to stop the whole day for.
Yeah.
For people who are nervous about that.
Yes, I will throw in my usual caveats, which is that everybody's different.
Yeah.
I have seen people purging all day with Huachuma.
Yeah.
And I think that it has to do with multiple factors, like I said, like their willingness to open and feel the underlying emotion. And if they're not willing to feel it, the medicine keeps inviting them, feel it, and then they don't, they can still release. They're still getting the benefit. They're still releasing that energy just through another way. So I have seen that with some people. And then again, like the detoxification aspect, this is a true medicine, on every level. So there is a detoxification that can happen. And if people have been taking medications for like 2 years and then they just came off the medication 5 days before the ceremony, a lot of these medications are super toxic. They cause other problems. The first thing the medicine wants to do for us is clean us. And I have seen people have that experience where they just get cleaned. And you mentioned, sometimes it's just, if we do a series of ceremonies, like the first ceremony, everybody's purging. The second ceremony, nobody purges at all. They've been cleaned out. Now they're not so scared. They're already open. So they started to feel everything. And yeah, so there's variations, but I think it's all beautiful. I mean, if I see somebody who's purging, mostly I just feel good for them because I'm like, well, they're releasing. And I just say, thank you, thank you to the cactus for helping them. And most people will report that they felt great after, that they do feel like they knew what they purged energetically. Like sometimes people will purge and they'll tell you, it's like, that was my sister. I just had, it's like, oh, you know.
So I don't know if this is a good time to enter this in, but we're talking about purging on the mountain in ceremony. I'm wondering if there's anything else you could speak to about the way it feels. Because some people who have never done it, they're like, they don't know what to expect as far as feeling goes. And I know it's something that it's very hard to actually put words to and try to describe the experience. But how would you describe it to somebody who's never been on a hike?
I generally try not to give a specific expectation. One of the things that I've learned about working with these plants is that if we set the expectation, oftentimes that becomes people's experience. So, the way that I would describe the feeling is that imagine that all of your filters have been removed. If anybody, and I've talked to parents of autistic children, parents who have hypersensitive children. I've even talked to people who are themselves on the spectrum. And I don't mean this in any way that would be offensive, but in a way we become autistic a little bit. Our filters, all of the normal things that we have that shield us from stimuli, both external stimuli, sights, sounds, vibrations, the temperature, even all of the things that shield us from feeling the intensity and the reality of that, those filters go away. And then without the filters of the internal as well, that we cannot filter what emotions are happening. We cannot, isolate them. And then there's this kind of synesthesia that happens where sound and light, they're kind of together and everything becomes connected. And, I personally view like people who have these autistic traits as like gifted. Now, it may be hard for them to live, and I can understand that, because if you try to live in the state of having Huachuma in your system all the time, you're not going to have an easy time in our world. Everything will be overwhelming, right? This is why like the container has to be very specific. So one way that I would describe it to people is that we're going to be a little bit autistic, sensitive, whatever you want to call it, hypersensitive for a period of time. And you're going to hear everything, feel everything, sense everything, both externally and internally, in a way that you haven't before, probably, in a way that might feel very intense. This also is echoed by, what's the famous book, The Doors of Perception? Mm-hmm. Aldous Huxley, who he talked about mescaline as this kind of reducing valve that takes away the filters. He didn't compare it to, autism, but in a way it does put us in that state. And I will say, I have had someone with very pronounced autism in a ceremony before, but this was with peyote. And this person, I gave way more medicine to him because he just kept not feeling it, to the point where at a certain point I realized there's nothing to do. There's nothing to do, actually. There's nothing that this medicine can do for him. It was a very interesting experience, actually. And so, yeah, that really informed kind of my opinion on it, is having worked with him. There was one other person that I think of that way too. But that, I would not compare it to any other medicine in a certain way. It's very unique, working with Huachuma. It's not comparable to, mushrooms or ayahuasca. It's its own thing. And I think we talked about it maybe on one of the earlier podcasts, but what I do feel is that when you work with this cactus, you enter the consciousness of the cactus and you get to experience what it is like maybe in this elevated, heightened state of consciousness. And you can appreciate this vibration. When I think about the cactus themselves, they're there. You can sit with one, they're alive. And what is their experience in that moment? Well, they're not sitting there thinking like Hamid is here, da 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 da. They're not thinking. Instead, they're vibrating and they're connecting and they're experiencing this kind of feeling. And so we have like that joke that we do where we're like this with our hands, like pointing up at the sky with our eyes open, which is kind of how you communicate, like, okay, that's what I'm feeling, right? It's like a pantomime, like I am a cactus now. So maybe that's how a better way to kind of imagine for somebody who's never worked with this cactus. The other thing is that I really don't think there's anything that's revealed here in working with Huachuma that isn't just a part of us in a way. So like if people will say like, oh, my leg hurts or it's giving me a backache. It's like, no, actually you were numb. Those pains were there probably for years and your body has shielded you from feeling it. So I don't believe, in my experience, is that it does not cause pain, does not cause physical pain. It may reveal physical pain that you had become numb to, right? In the same way, it will reveal emotions that maybe we were numb to, or the heart opening, because maybe we were closed in our heart. We were numb to that. So that's the other thing is like people say it's a heart opener. Well, maybe it's just revealing, the way a heart naturally is. It didn't do anything. It took away our numbness to it. So yeah, there can't, there's this, put that aside, then there's, the other part, which is that there can be a very intense physical feeling with it, I will say, depending on how much medicine one takes. If one takes a lot of medicine, or if you're sensitive like me, you don't even need a lot, and you take that second cup, which probably you don't need, there can be an intensity to the amount that you're feeling that you would confuse for being caused by the medicine. It's just that you're now so sensitive to everything that almost everything doesn't feel good at that point. It's sort of like when you're being tickled and it hurts, but it's joyful. Does that make sense? It's like this intense, it's like you can't tell if it's pain or pleasure. But I only experience that like when I'm peer pressured into taking the second cup during the ceremonies. Oh, yeah.
So a couple things I thought of. It almost, you know how when people stop taking their antidepressants or SSRIs or things that sort of blunt their feelings, and then they're actually feeling all the world, and it's like sometimes really overwhelming. As you were talking about actually feeling all the feels, that's what it reminded me of, was like Huachuma's like this other layer to opening yourself up to yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you said something during, maybe we were in Peru or something, but you were talking about how it makes you sensitive to things that have always been there. And it opens you up, yeah, into that. And for me, what I've been realizing lately is it's opening me up to how connected all things are. Like the weather and the spiders and all the things are so connected to our prayers and what we're doing kind of in the moment. And even before ceremony starts, like there's rainbows and all these things going on. And that's always there. That's not something new that's just happening during ceremony, but it's like when we're in this energy of it, even before it starts, it's all starting to happen and sort of get connected. So that's been my experience. And then the sensitivity, I think about that time we went out to eat after ceremony in Pisac in Peru, and how the lights and the sounds and everything was so overwhelming and assaulting that I was just like, where's the mountain? It just felt so much. So thinking about somebody who's like autistic in a way, it really makes you feel like, oh, I kind of understand how that situation can be really challenging and hard. So I want to talk a little bit about preparation. And we talked a little bit about minerals and having a clean vessel and all these different things. But a lot of times I get asked by people, what's the best way to prepare? Because I think people are used to hearing the ayahuasca preparation, which tends to be a lot more strict of a nutritional thing, or it can be when people are suggesting it. But for Huachuma, what do you suggest for nutrition, maybe even emotional or energetic prescriptions, contraindications? Like, I kind of want to talk about that.
Well, that's a lot.
That's a lot, I know.
That's a lot. Let's start with one piece of the puzzle, maybe.
Okay.
Emotionally. Again, this is going to depend on each person. It's maybe easier for me to say what not to do. What you don't want to do is just roll in to a ceremony from work. And let's say you're working as a doctor in an emergency room, and you only have time off, 2 days a week, and you worked, and then the next morning you just drop into a ceremony. This is like an example of what not to do. And I think this is universal to all the medicines that people are working with, maybe even psychedelic therapy. So it could be applicable. One is that you really need to be with yourself, and you need to allow whatever is under the surface to express itself before ceremony. So let's say you're going on a retreat or you're going to a ceremony a month in advance, maybe. You want to start to let go of external stimuli to the best extent you can. That means letting go of watching the news, letting go of social media, letting go of all the things that cloud our consciousness. And the consequences of not doing that are pretty profound. You've probably seen this, but maybe didn't articulate it as well, because like you get into ceremony and then all people are dealing with is all the stuff they watched in the news, all the election stuff. This party did this party did that. And to the point where they're so confused about what's actually going on within them that they're still projecting into this artificial news space. So I would suggest, now this doesn't apply to everybody. I don't watch the news. I don't even know what's going on. People have to tell me if there's a government shutdown, and I'm like, great, okay. And then I make a joke. I'm like, well, this tree here doesn't really care, so why should I care? But, I'm kind of like the opposite. Is like I take the opposite extreme, which is like I'm just not tuned in. But many people are tuned in, and I think they need to tune out well before the ceremony, so that all of these things that they're processing, they process and they get it out of their system. And maybe they want to journal, and maybe they want to get it out. Once the mind becomes clear, then you can start to journal intentions. You can start to do things that start to plant the seeds for what you want to cultivate. But I would not encourage people to just sit down, overstimulated in their life, busy, and try to write an intention. What they need to do is just sit and just see what comes up. The other thing is people will, think I'm a little extreme on this, but I don't think anyone should go to a plant medicine ceremony if you can't just sit. Like if sitting on the couch with no stereo, with no news, with no phone, with no conversation for, let's say, 30 minutes, if that is hard for you to do, the last thing you want to do is go to a plant medicine ceremony, because it is way harder to be with yourself without the filters, without all of the what psychology calls coping mechanisms, you know? So when the medicine turns off your coping mechanisms, you're going to have to be with yourself. So I'm kind of extreme on that. And I usually ask people on intakes and applications for the retreat, like, what kind of practices do you have? Like, can you tell me about them? Because that's important. Just being able to sit and be and feel whatever's there. You mentioned antidepressants. I'll just bring this up in this context because what most people are dealing with and having to take antidepressants is the inability to do what I just said, is the inability to be with whatever's coming up. And that is not a good sign for working with a plant medicine. If you can't be with just yourself, then start there. Start by just sitting there. I think Thich Nhat Hanh had something where he just said, he's like, don't just do something, sit there. That's it. That's your medicine. Now, if people want to get super fancy on intentions, before our retreats, we have all these calls and, I go through all kinds of themes that people can work with, like exploring, the elements along with the themes that go with the elements. Like, let's say the water and our emotions, or, sensuality, themes related to, shame and sexuality, all these themes that we have in our life. And I do encourage people that have things that are like bubbling beneath the surface to journal, maybe write out some of these things before the ceremony, and then forget about them in a way. Just doing it before the ceremony primes the subconscious. The analogy I always give is that you're planting a seed in the subconscious. That's what the intention is. It's just, you've taken the time, you've noted it, you've written about it, you've thought about it, then it's in there. Forget about it during the ceremony and focus on the prayers of the ceremony, focus on the intentions of that day. And that seed will blossom into something. You don't have to focus on it. This is definitely, Huachuma in particular, is definitely not a medicine that wants us to be in our heads all day. I mean, we live in our heads. So why not take the day to come out of the head and come into the senses, come into the experience of being in your body and seeing everything and feeling everything and not trying to understand everything. Sometimes people are like, oh, I don't understand. It's like you're trying to understand, but that's kind of like missing the point. Why don't you just appreciate? Why don't you just sit with the awe and just be with that, instead of trying to reduce it to something that you could claim you understood, So that's like mental preparation. If you want to use the term diet or dieta, I always tell people, do an information diet. Just get away from external information, be with yourself. Move the body, like be in your body. Any practice that gets you into the body will be helpful. Yoga, hiking, being in Mother Nature. Those are preparation for me. Contraindications. This is a long list, and I don't like the term contraindications because it's very clinical. And what we're engaged with here are not clinical practices. So it's almost the wrong term. But again, like people that are taking medications, Western medications can be very disruptive to our natural homeostasis. I generally don't believe in trying to mix the two. It's almost like pick your paradigm. You want Western medicine, you want psychoactive Western pharmaceuticals, that's your paradigm. Stay there. You want to get beyond that paradigm and recognize that our ancestors never had that. Prozac wasn't invented until what, the 80s. How did humans live for thousands of years without Prozac, without SSRIs? You want to adopt a paradigm that honors our ancestors, that is in tune with nature, and that honors your body? Then do that. And I will help people who are willing to do that come off of their medications well in advance so that they can work with these plants. But when people are like, but I can't stop taking this and I can't stop taking this, that's a really hard thing for me, because I kind of just say, well, you're trying to mix two things that have completely different philosophies. And mixing them doesn't often go well. I'm not saying it causes harm, but it just doesn't lead to the outcomes that people think. I've had people lie, about, oh, I'm not on my SSRIs and things like that. Well, when they take the medicine, that you can't lie to the medicine. You can lie to me. You can't lie to that medicine. It knows, and you're going to be, paying the price or just not feeling anything, So I know that sounds harsh. There are containers in the United States that are developing that I'm not a part of, but they're very clinical based, because doctors here want to work with people to get them off of these medications. I think it's wonderful. And that is a whole different thing than what we do. That world of getting people off their medications, using mushrooms, using these plant medicines, I don't have any part of that. It's not something that I want to do, but there are containers for that. So if anybody's listening to this and they think I'm saying they cannot work with these plants, that's not the case. I was just offering for what we offer, for our retreats and for our containers. That isn't what we offer. We offer the opportunity for people who are willing to go deep, but it's a very difficult situation to have somebody who is basically in need of triage, to come off of a medication, to come in that container. The container is not designed for that, and the experience will not be the best for that person. So preparation, get as clean as you can, decide what paradigm you believe in. Do you believe in Mother Nature, the wisdom of your body, the wisdom of the earth? Then it shouldn't be a difficult task to get off your medications. If you don't, then, sit with that and see. There are certain medications that I have allowed people to come to Peru on, and that don't interact super in a bad way. And I don't think those people are in any way like picking a paradigm. It's because the nature of those medications, a lot of them have to do with like allergies. It's actually that the person is way oversensitive already. And that's kind of a good sign in certain respects. And so, it's not a complete contraindication, some medications. But I think we had like funny things happen where people, I don't know if this was with, it was like in a ceremony or a retreat maybe, and people are like, does anyone have an Advil? And I'm like cringing. I'm like, why? Like, we just did all this good work to detoxify our bodies, and now we're going to take a toxic Western medicine. I have a hard time with that. No judgment for people wanting to numb their pain, but there are alternatives to Advil, if you have a headache. So I would just be more curious as to what the alternatives are, and, explore the more natural things, because the cleaner we keep our bodies, the better for working with these plants.
Thank you. I have a question about looking for a facilitator, because I know like we're having this conversation more about Huachuma in general, and maybe the answer is people have to find their own way and go through this and go through that. But if people are looking to join a retreat or go to Peru? Like, what are some things that you look for when you're like, oh, this person's like really in the right vibration, or because I think the plant medicine industry is or industry, I don't even know if that's what you want to call it, the plant medicine universe. Sometimes people will go to one ceremony and then facilitate the next one. And I just for safety reasons, is there anything people, and when people go to Peru or something like that, you see flyers on all these doors about all these different ceremonies that are going on. And how do you know where to go?
That's a good question. To me, I don't ever remember having to think about this because it's just kind of obvious to me. Like, the person that has a flyer, like in the cafe that says Huachuma ceremonies, and they're clearly 25 years old, or it's just kind of like, what? Why would I go there? I have had people I know who have tried to find ceremonies in Peru by going online over the years. And, you know, the way I think about it is like this. I will give an example from my former life as an attorney, because I think this example is what really hammered home for me just in my subconscious how marketing works. So I was a very good lawyer, by the way. And here's the point where I kind of like inflate myself, but I was top of my class, UCLA. I clerked for a federal judge. With each federal judge gets over 800 applications for one spot. It is the most prestigious position you can get. I went to the top law firm in Los Angeles, O'Melveny and Myers, for those people who care. It is prestige, prestige, prestige. I went and I practiced. I did some of the most important litigation cases in the country. A lot of the decisions that were written, like for these cases, it's because I briefed it. I wrote the briefs. So there's precedents out there that I helped establish. I was a really good attorney. Okay. And you know what? I didn't advertise. Never, for any of this stuff. If you go like in Phoenix, that's where I live, down just any major street, there's going to be billboard after billboard of in a wreck, need a check. Call this guy. Is your car gone? Call Sargon. I saw that recently, the guy's name. The discount accident lawyers. There's like the muscle lawyers. They're driving Harleys. I'm just like, okay. As an attorney, it was very obvious to all of us who were good attorneys, who actually won cases, who knew what we were doing, that those people on the billboards are the worst attorneys in the world, period. End of story. They are terrible. You would never hire a doctor to do a surgery on you, I hope, because he had a billboard on a main street. Now, the billboards have gone virtual to websites. So who's advertising for retreats? Who's advertising for ceremonies? The best people or the worst people? And I know this is harsh, but I will tell you, the people that are advertising are the worst, usually, because they need to advertise. The way that people get their clients or their people, if they're good, is via referral. All the people that came to their ceremony send all their friends, send all their friends, send all their friends. Why does the guy on the street with the billboard have to have a billboard? Because every person that hired them had a terrible experience and nobody would refer their friend. Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah.
So let me step off my righteous soapbox for a second and say that if you are looking for a facilitator, you probably aren't going to find them online. I'm serious. Now, I'll put a caveat. There are really amazing facilitators now One being Miguel, who we work with, who's our teacher, who we created a website for because he didn't have one. He has no idea how to manage the website. It's all managed by Ross, who we had on the podcast. And I think recently we tried to turn it over to Miguel to manage, but he gave it to someone else. I don't know that he's gotten a single client out of the website. You know, it was more of like honoring him and the work he's done. And I had the URL for huachumaceremony.com because I bought all the Huachuma ceremony websites back before anybody wanted them. And I was like, I'm going to gift you the best URL in the world because you are the best Huachumero in the world. You know, so that's an exception. I have noticed that, like Ross mentioned, Santiago doesn't have his own website, but the retreat center where he's now working has put him on the website. So, you know, with some exceptions, there are people with websites. Google ads, Instagram ads are not a good way to find a ceremony. I sometimes see people advertising ceremonies in Instagram ads. Not a good way. The best way is to ask people. If you know people who are in the plant medicine world, ask them, who did you work with? Did you have a good experience? Can you tell me about that? You know, everybody that I work with is generally word of mouth these days, except we do advertise the retreats online. But yeah, you know, that's kind of the way to go. What do you do when you find somebody? You talk to them. You see whether there's any spidey senses that come up. You might want to ask about how they hold space, depending on what you need. Like, I'll give you an example. Like, we've had people trying to come to the retreat, and then they'll say things like, well, you know, I need somebody who's going to be there with me. If I go through a really intense emotional thing, like I need one-on-one support and all of this. That's really good to know as a facilitator, if that's their expectation, because then they can tell you whether they can meet you there. If they're going to say, well, I have 40 people else in the ceremony, you're amongst 40 other people. So, you know, we have helpers, but maybe, you know, we'll get to you. You know, I'd be a little bit, if that were my expectation, I'd be a little bit like, no, I don't think so. I'm really wanting one-on-one. So then I'm going to try to find someone who would offer a one-on-one. I would look at how long maybe they've been serving medicine, although I don't know that this is always, to me, the biggest factor, because there are people who I think I'd be more impressed with somebody who is somehow a genius in this realm and has only been serving for 5 years, but has, you know, 200 people who I, you know, see that, like, say this is the person to go to, and they really are a magical person. They know how to hold space. That's fine. You know, I'm not going to hold it against them. They haven't, you know, been doing it 20 years. Maybe they don't need 20 years. But I will say, for me, I only drink medicine with people who I super, super trust. And I've only been in ceremony with 2 people facilitating Huachuma in my entire life. And most of those are with Miguel. And there is another person before Miguel. I don't send anybody. If people ask me for a referral, I don't send them to the one that I was with before. See, that's a good sign. Like, okay, don't go there because it's not good. Because once I started to work with Miguel, I only send people to him. And that's just based on my experience. I don't think people should jump around either, you know, unless you're still not found someone you resonate with. Like, go deep, like pick, you know, I go through this a while, you know, like thinking about it. It's like the tradition with Miguel is one way of working with Huachuma. And when we were talking to Daya on the last podcast, I'm like, I want to go to one of his ceremonies, right? Because it's so different, but so the same. But also it's like, I'm so deep in the tradition that we're in that I want to go deeper, you know? There's an analogy that I don't know where this comes from, but it's quite common where it's like someone was told like to dig a hole for a well at their house. And so, they start digging 10 feet, they don't find water. So they move like over there, they dig another 10 feet, they don't find water. And they dig over there, another 10 feet, right? And then like after the whole while, there's like a million holes and they haven't found water. And they should have just stayed in the one spot and kept digging in that way and gone deep. So for me, I think once you find somebody who feels safe, they hold a good container, they resonate, they're supportive of your needs and what you're desiring, maybe stay with them for a while. Because there's also something that starts to happen, which is that you may get to a place where the medicine and the ceremonies are actually working and opening up a lot of things that you have to deal with. And you may think it's caused by the person facilitating when it's not. You're just projecting upon them and they actually are helping you open. I would also say that with that in mind, don't ever tolerate abuse. Don't ever tolerate, people who are disrespectful, people that cross boundaries. It's very important that the facilitator understand boundaries and how to maintain them. Things like that are very important as a baseline. If people are looking for recommendations, the recommendations that we've had on this podcast, I think are an excellent source. Ross, who I don't remember what number podcast he's on, he gave a few. One was Santiago Ayala. I remember, of course, Miguel Mendiburo in the Sacred Valley. There was somebody else he mentioned. So I would go based on Ross's advice to any ceremony he told me about, because he told me about Miguel, and I trust him. He's very discerning as well. Javier Reguero, of course, has passed away, so he's not available anymore. But I would have gone to ceremony with Javier. I was about to. I was ready to go. And, he left a little too early for that. But yeah, that's kind of how I would go about it. Stay away from Instagram ads, stay away from flashy websites, and get word of mouth recommendations from people you trust, from people who've had experiences.
Amazing. Thank you. And anybody can just come with us to Peru.
Yeah, people can come with us and we'll take you to Miguel Mendiburo.
So I want to talk about, I know we've been on here for a while. Briefly just about integrating after ceremonies and what that is like and sort of the importance of it. And I do want to talk about the online course offering that we have coming up soon, because I feel like that could be a deeper continuation of some of these questions. So those are kind of my last two topics I'd like to talk about.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you. Actually, I was hoping we would talk about the integration, because you mentioned that earlier, how the heart openings get deeper and deeper and you get more open and you start to see the parts of your life when you return from ceremony that are no longer in alignment, or maybe they never were in alignment, honestly, but we kind of block ourselves to that or tell ourselves a story about that. So integration can be really challenging. I mean, we go through it with our retreat people a lot, because people go down and just 10 days, they come back and a lot of them are just shocked at the life that they have, in a way that's like, whoa, what am I doing? Like, this is my life. I brought this to myself, but it doesn't feel in alignment anymore. Part of the problem I have with the word integration, and this is, again, it's like a modern psychological term, I think, used to kind of imply that we should be able to integrate. It almost sets the expectation that if you cannot integrate, then there's something wrong. And then there's going to be an integration therapist who will come and help you. Well, one of the issues I have with that is that, and this is just me speaking, okay? So people can absolutely disagree. One of the issues I have with that is that maybe what we come to in these journeys and these ceremonies is closer to our absolute truth, or is closer to what our core self wants and what our core self needs. And then we come back to our life and we struggle, mainly because the conditions of our life aren't that. There's a difference. There's a dissonance, perhaps. And so the question I have for people about integration is, do you really want to integrate? Is your goal to come back into your life and be absolutely happy with everything you have? Is that how you want to integrate? Or is the idea of integration that you are going to come back and you're going to take the messages that you received, the understandings you received, and are you going to start behaving and acting from that core self that you touched? And are you going to make that your life? And the biggest struggles I see with people having to integrate is that they don't want to change on some level. So that's where the dissonance happens. They want to have all of the insights, the opening, the clarity, the understanding of what they need, of what they want, of what their heart wants. And then they want to come back and feel like everything is perfect when it's not. So I'm just putting this out there because I do see the importance of integration help, but I've always been of this mindset for myself that I cannot tolerate a life that is not in alignment with my heart. I will not. I can, actually. I did as an attorney, but I choose not to. How about that? And this can bring up a lot of fears for people because of, well, what are they going to do? What do they do about that? And that's where the work is. If there's any help in integration that I think a good integration coach or somebody that works in integration can offer, is really just reflecting back to the people, to each person, reflecting back what they desire, what they want, so that they keep seeing it, and so that they can keep remembering that they're creating their reality and they're creating their lives. And I'll be the first to admit that it's hard. It's very hard. Remember when we were talking with Daya on the last podcast? I kind of asked him about that a little bit, but I was like, I can really see like why people stay in the Sacred Valley. I mean, it makes sense. It makes sense. Like, I had this experience last week where I tried to return something to Costco and they wouldn't take it back because it's too old. But they have a return policy. They say, we'll take it back no matter how old it is. But I didn't have the receipt. And they say, you don't need a receipt because it's in their computer. But then they type it in, they're like, well, we don't have records past 10 years, sir. And for a whole day after, I was thinking, why am I even dealing with this? Why do I choose to live in a world where Costco is my day-to-day life? Returning a vacuum is part of my existence. Why? I'm choosing that. I chose to live in this world. I could choose to go live in Thailand. I could choose to go live in Peru. I could choose to go do that. And so for me, it's really easy to see that I'm making that choice, and then to see I'm choosing it because there's a lesson there for me that I still haven't gotten. and it's nice, then I see the medicine just showing that to me all the time. This is where your work is. And it's not painful. It's just an awareness, you know. But I remember Daya, he's just kind of like in that other state, which is like, I think he's done a lot more work earlier than I did, where he just decided, yeah, no, I'm ready to give myself the life that I fully desire. And the only person holding the keys is me. And so he did it, right? And like when we talk to Miguel and he's always like, yeah, brother, when are you going to move here? It's like that, right? And I'm like, well, yep, I'm holding the keys to my own prison, right? But I like my prison. I'm not willing to let go of my prison. So that's where my work is on integration, you know. I will say that it, you know, when we do 2 ceremonies in Peru each summer, it can take years to actually integrate those 2 ceremonies, to make the life choices that start to feel in alignment, to also be good with not making those choices if they're there to be made. I remember this last summer, Miguel said something to us that was really beautiful. I mean, he says so many beautiful things, but he said, it's not about feeling good every day. It's about being good with how you feel.
So good.
He's like, you can't feel good every day. You're not going to win that battle. You're human. That's not part of being human. So there will be days you don't feel good. But when you have the awareness that that is part of the human journey, then you can be good with that. You can be good with how you feel, even if it's not good. And that's kind of how I feel about integration. People just need to start to be good with how they feel and not put the expectation that they should be feeling a certain way, but just come into the reality of how they're feeling. And I think a lot of the stress around it then dissipates, and a lot of the feeling of like, you know, you're not acting, you're not doing these things. It's okay. You can let it go for a little bit and just try to be good with where you're at and forgiving. As far as integration practices, like specific things, I really think it's helpful to have people from your experience or community to talk with, to be with, to connect with. To me, integration is much more challenging in the Western world because we come back and a lot of people don't have a supportive group of people to share, you know, these conversations with, to even just feel like they can talk openly, like maybe in their own household, they can't, you know. And that, I think, is the biggest thing, is you just need to have people. And so what we're creating, you know, with Huachuma Foundation, a lot of that is just community, like starting to plant the seeds to build a community, because I think, you know, that's just how we're going to help each other.
Great. Thank you for talking about integration. It's always the hardest part for me. It always feels like being in ceremony and being on the mountain feels like home. It feels realer than real. And then I come back home to something else that's also real, but feels not real somehow. And it's always really hard for me to kind of live both, have one foot in and one foot in the other one. So my real ceremony starts when I get home and I'm like, okay, now what do I do with all these insights? And I think that's when you and Miguel talk about the path of no way back, because part of it is like, you can't unsee what you saw and you can't unfeel and unknow things now. So what are you going to do with that? And I really like what you said about it's a choice, like a decision that you make within yourself. Are you okay with knowing things and keeping it the same? Or do you really want to do the real work and have the hard conversations and make the moves and whatever you need to do? in order to be more in alignment with your heart. So I think it's like, what's really important? What's the actual priority of life? Is it evolution? Is it alignment, or is it comfort, or going to ceremony after ceremony or retreat after retreat just to be in the ceremonies and just to be with people and be on the medicine? Because there's so much more work to be done actually in the integration.
Yeah, that's the hard work. Being on the mountain is not hard.
That's the best. And community has been so helpful, just to talk to people who have lived what you lived for even just a day. You spent the day, because some people, you come home and you can't relate, and you try to tell them even the magical parts, and then it like falls really flat. And it's like, oh my God, I wish I didn't even say anything. And so then even talking about the hard parts, let alone the magical parts, can sometimes be even more challenging to talk to people that you think might be able to help you, but they can't. So the communities that we have, like all the years that we've been to Peru, was probably one of my favorite parts, because I am like best friends with some of the people that we went with, because of what we all got to live together for 10 days. And even the months before and after in our integration call, sometimes it's nice to just get on a call with a bunch of friendly faces and people who get you on another level that this world sometimes can never understand. And sometimes it's nice to just be able to share a vibration like that with somebody. Yeah, talking about community, maybe we talk about online community and online offering, and how what's coming up for us other than the retreat.
Sure. Yeah. Well, we have 2 retreats. I will say them anyway. Not
Yeah,
that
please.
I think I've said them in the past, but we have a retreat from June 18th to the 28th of 2026. This is the Heart Path retreat. This is our retreat we've been doing this will be the 4th year. And it's 2 ceremonies, but there's so much more to it. There's a 6-month kind of container and preparation, and just a lot of really amazing times in the Sacred Valley. We've already got 5 spots filled. There's only 9 spots, by the way, as of today, and we're recording this in November. I do anticipate that one's going to fill up pretty quickly. So if people listening to this are interested, get your application in. There is an application. It's not intended to like eliminate people. It really is just a way for us to get to know people. And then usually what I do is I set up a call so that I can talk with each person individually, because this is a big deal. It's not just a casual trip to Peru. After that retreat, we have July 2nd to the 12th, 2026, a fire path. That's what we're calling it. This is a deeper dive, and I'm really only opening this for very experienced people who have been in ceremony with me or have been to Peru before and worked with this medicine. The reason is we're going to skip a lot of the sightseeing. So we're not going to go to the sacred sites per se. We might do some little things, but we're really going to dive in with 3 Huachuma ceremonies within 10 days. 2 of those will be the mountain ceremonies that we do on the Heart Path. And one of them will be an all-night fire ceremony. And the fire ceremony is hard to describe. Dani loves them, I will say. Some people have had a difficult time with it, and that's why I'm doing it just for the advanced people. Because it does require a level of attention and a level of willingness that goes beyond the mountain ceremony. We're gathered around a fire from basically sunset to sunup, and it is one of the most profound experiences that people can have. But again, so 2 retreats. That one, there's more space. If you've experienced Huachuma or been in fire ceremonies with the Native American Church or anything like that, you probably will have familiarity with what you're up for. You can still apply for that just asking that people have experience. In January of 2026, we have been feeling to offer a way to build community and just more discussions around Huachuma. So we're opening up something called Huachuma Wisdom, which will be a 6-month journey of discovery. And we'll be discovering along with you, but essentially it's an online gathering. We're going to meet via Google Meet or Zoom, whichever one works best. And we'll have meetings once a month. The meetings will be recorded in case you cannot attend all of them. Tentatively, Monday, January 12th will be the first. Tentatively, you'll check the website when I formally launch this. And it'll be in the evening, 4:30 p.m. to 6 p.m. Arizona time, which comes to like 6:30 to 8 Eastern time. And it's going to be offered on a donation basis. So each month we're going to have different topics that we discuss, and then we'll have community discussion. So anybody participating in the call, we'll have questions and answers and that type of thing reserved at the end of the call. But we'll go into the history of Huachuma. We'll talk about some of the more indigenous traditions that we haven't yet talked about on this podcast. We'll, of course, talk about what we're doing as far as preservation efforts and where we want to go with our preservation efforts. We have a lot of ideas and we're going to seek input. We'll talk about the science and the spirit of Huachuma, similar to the discussions we had today about the biochemical versus the spiritual, and understanding those connections and how to make sense of them. We'll talk about ceremonial practices, integration, the role of rituals and intentions. And we'll also talk about trauma and emotions. One of the big things I think that, even though it may not be part of all of the ceremonies explicitly, one of the things that people will recognize when they go through a ceremony with Huachuma is that it's a master at helping to release emotions and traumas. And if we know how to work with those things from a informed way, we can really make it healing versus more traumatic. We'll talk about practical considerations. So I am an attorney, and I will have discussions about the legal landscape in the U.S. because I know people have questions about this. Preservation, ethical cultivation practices. We're going to try to have some guest speakers on too. I haven't lined any up, but would like to get some guest speakers who are experts in their field. And we'll have other discussions, even advanced discussions for facilitators, if there are facilitators present. And so what we're asking for is, if you're interested, to make a donation to Huachuma Foundation, which we are an Arizona nonprofit. We're currently working through the IRS hurdles to get our 501c3. And actually, this course will help us do that. One of the things we have to show to the IRS is that the majority of our funding comes from donations and not from my own pocket. We're already kind of there, but your donations will really help us prove to the IRS that we're a public charity. And if you can afford to donate $108, that's all we're asking. You can, of course, donate anything you like. And I don't have a sign up yet on the website, but the sign up will be at huachumafoundation.org. Hopefully soon you'll be able to sign up there, and it'll also get you on our email list and other ways to stay in touch. So that's kind of what's coming up.
Amazing. Thank you, Hamid. I'm very much looking forward to this. Like, dreams are coming true through the Huachuma Foundation for me. Like a whole online course where all we do for 6 months is talk about Huachuma, and then we go to Peru together and get to experience it. It's just, I don't know. It's like I'm so excited that this is coming online, and yeah, the community gets to grow even wider and wider now. People from all over the world could join this, which is so neat. And people who may never be able to come to Peru, we could still connect with, even if they're like in Australia or Greece or something, or England. And we can all be together having this conversation and kind of spreading the prayer in a different way now. Yeah. So thank you. Thanks for kind of going forward with all of that.
Yeah, super exciting.
Well, I think maybe we should wrap it up. Is there anything else you want to say?
No, that's it. If people want to contribute to this podcast, I'll just put a reminder out there. If you'd like to be a guest, you have topics you want us to cover, send us an email. The email for a general email is info@huachumafoundation.org. But yeah, it's just, it's nice to have these conversations and looking forward to many more.
Amazing. Me too. Thank you, everybody. We'll see you on the next one.
This podcast episode was a production of the Huachuma Foundation. If you would like to be a guest on our show, email us at huachumafoundation@gmail.com. If you would like to learn more about us or support our mission, please visit huachumafoundation.org. And most of all, remember to plant more, worry less.